Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Zara. I'm a senior charter assessor with the University Mental Health Charter team. And in this resource, we're going to be covering the live domain of the charter. So this resource will introduce the live domain and its accompanying themes, explain why the domain and its themes are important, and what the evidence shows about the themes, their importance, and potential challenges with how they're currently embedded. And then we'll wrap up by sharing some take-home messages. So firstly, let's introduce the live domain. The live domain is made up of 4 themes: proactive interventions and a mentally healthy environment, residential accommodation, social integration and belonging, and physical environment. Each theme has its own principles of good practice, which you can find full details of in the 4 University Mental Health Charter framework. So, moving into proactive interventions and a mentally healthy environment. This theme broadly covers ensuring that universities have a culture and an environment that supports good mental health, that they have proactive interventions to improve the mental health of the whole community, both students and staff, and that they also have proactive interventions targeted at the mental health of specific groups of students that are catered to their needs. So why is this important? Proactive interventions and a mentally healthy environment can act as a prevention measure, being proactive about mental health with approaches that promote good mental health and a supportive culture that allows us to understand and embed healthy behaviours can be a preventative measure to developing poor mental health. Part of having a mentally healthy environment surrounds the non-clinical support that could be implemented, such as physical activity, academic support, and environmental cues to support positive change and help individuals to identify the most appropriate ways forward for them. Engagement with both academic and administrative systems is a central part of university life. This means that these systems and processes have a significant ability to impact on our mental health, both positively and negatively. And a mentally healthy environment should acknowledge that different groups have different needs, and that interventions should be proactively tailored to those groups and their needs, using the evidence that exists within individual institutional contexts. So, what do we know? We know that our environment and surrounding culture has a significant effect on our mental health and well-being. Research shows that we have complex relationships within our social context. These can lead to cultural rippling. And the environment can actually be a stronger influence on our health and health-related behaviours than just having knowledge about health and what it means to be healthy. We need to recognise the impact of social context within universities to create a whole university environment that supports good well-being for all. This is increasingly important as there are consistent findings that many staff and students who experience poor mental health do not access formal support. So proactive interventions can be an important part of support for those who may be reluctant to access more formalised support or clinical-based interventions. Proactive interventions can have significant positive impacts on well-being and health behaviours. However, there is no one-size-fits-all approach or type of support. There is increasing evidence that universally delivered interventions are capable of doing harm, and a whole university approach needs to recognise the diversity in need, that different interventions may work or may not work for different groups. This needs to be evidence-informed and evaluated to ensure relevance and effectiveness, and this is where co-creation with staff and students can be really important. We also know that environment and culture underpin any effective intervention. Behaviours such as eating well, sleeping well, and engaging in exercise or spending time in nature can have a long-lasting pulled effect, meaning that the benefits continue beyond the activity itself. Therefore, having a culture and an environment which supports positive change allows this ripple effect to happen, and for interventions to become embedded behaviours. This includes visible messaging from leadership, opportunities to engage in practices and behaviours, and a feeling of safety to disclose poor mental health and seek support. Some of the places where these proactive interventions could be delivered is in residential accommodation. This theme covers university halls of residence, university arrangements with private halls of residence, and supporting students who are in private, non-university owned or managed accommodations. As we spoke about in the last theme, where we are can be incredibly important for our mental health. We know that many students will spend more time in their accommodation settings than in lectures or in the classroom. This means that residential accommodation can have a major impact on student experience and their mental health and well-being. Student accommodation is not just a physical place to eat, sleep, and study. We have an emotional relationship with the spaces in which we live. Students having the ability to feel ownership over their living space can create a sense of belonging and connection within the space. The physical space and aspects such as access to natural light, warmth, and proximity to others also affect other health behaviours such as sleep, diet, and socialisation. And creating a sense of safety, both physical and psychological, can reduce loneliness, allow for creation and maintaining of friendships, and feeling unsafe, either physically or psychologically, has negative consequences for well-being. So, what do we know? We know that home as a space is not simply functional. Research has consistently shown that housing quality and housing security impact on our mental health, our sense of belonging, and identity. We know that residential accommodations is transitory. By its nature, it's temporary, and this transitory aspect can have an unsettling effect on well-being and impact the development and maintenance of friendships and other relationships. Residential accommodation can also provide a space for belonging and proactive interventions that we discussed earlier. Loneliness is a documented concern among students, and accommodation can play a big role in developing friendships and students feeling part of the university. Student accommodation can also provide a space for community building and interventions that support well-being. Accommodation is also an environment where students who may be experiencing poor mental health could be identified and referred to support. However, we also know that residential accommodation can pose a number of challenges to positive well-being. Instances of bullying, violence, harassment, or criminal behaviour can have a substantive negative impact on mental health. We know that some of the most serious experiences of mental illness, including episodes of crisis or self-harm, can happen in accommodation, which has negative impacts on the student who is struggling, but also their peers who they live with. All of these factors can also influence students' sense of social integration and belonging. This theme covers ensuring students become socially integrated into university, creating a safe and inclusive community for all, and tackling the causes of isolation. So, why is social belonging so important? Well, social connectedness is known to be very important because we as humans have a need to belong to a community and feel connected to others. This can give us a sense of value, and when we don't feel like we belong or we feel like we don't have social connections, this can impact on our well-being. There's also been the noted rise of loneliness. Students who experience loneliness may benefit from ongoing support to build their sense of belonging and sense of community, particularly given the impact of the pandemic, creating additional barriers to creating and sustaining communities. And also, universities are communities. Universities have significant influence over the culture, rules, and ways of interacting that we would define a community as. Universities provide the physical and the psychological environment to build communities. The university is not just students or staff, but is a community in and of itself. So, what do we know about social integration and belonging? We know that it's not just a psychological phenomenon. Things like loneliness can affect our physical and our mental health. Research shows that perceived loneliness reduces our cognitive function, mood, sleep, and immunity to other illnesses. It also has a direct negative impact on academic performance. This can then create a negative emotional cycle where feelings of loneliness undermine mood, self-belief, belonging, and academic performance, which heightens feelings of loneliness, and so on and so on. There are also enabling factors and barriers to having a sense of social integration and belonging. There's evidence that some students are more susceptible to being excluded and to experiencing loneliness, such as disabled students, racially minoritized students, international students, and those from certain other backgrounds. Therefore, tackling harassment and discrimination and creating a truly inclusive culture is important to enable social belonging and the building of community, with discrimination, harassment, and bullying having a known negative impact on mental and physical health. We should also not forget the curriculum in this. Students don't only build their belonging in communities, either within their residential accommodation, as we discussed earlier, or within extracurricular activities such as clubs and societies, but students do so within the classroom too. The curriculum can provide a space for creating a sense of community, as we can see in the impact of online learning on belonging and course identity for some students. Work can be done within the curriculum to support social integration and the creation of relationships. But we also know that social integration and belonging is for all of us, not just for students. Social integration and belonging are important for well-being, but research shows it's also important for motivation, engagement, achievement, and getting to graduation. But staff also need to feel a sense of belonging in community, be that within their own department, faculty, or the wider university. Research shows us that staff culture and sense of inclusion not only has an impact on the staff levels of well-being, but also their relationships with students and students' learning environments. Staff culture shapes the learning community that affects students and students' ability to build communities. The final theme within the lived domain is that of the physical environment. Physical environment relates, obviously, to residential accommodation being a physical space, but also, as hopefully we've seen in previous themes, to the ability for students and staff to build communities and for interventions to take place. This theme covers things like the design and maintenance of work, learning, and living spaces within the university, the provision and use of green spaces and nature, movement between buildings and wayfinding, and how universities can reduce risk through the physical environment. So, why is this important? As we explored earlier in reference to the psychological environment, our physical environment and how we interact with it can also have a significant impact on our mental health and well-being. The physical environment also provides opportunity for things like proactive interventions to be delivered and for social integration and communities to be built. It can also allow opportunities for us to engage with nature. It might make staff and students more likely to come onto campus, or to engage in health-promoting behaviours like physical activity or reflection and relaxation. The environment also has both provision and practicality. The provision of space for socialising can have positive consequences for well-being. However, the practical function of space, including its accessibility, can also be used to embed well-being within the structure of universities. So what do we know about the physical environment? We know that the physical environment of universities is not static. There are trends in how space is used within universities. Research has shown that things like open plan offices or hot desking can impact on staff well-being, stress levels, and productivity. And as we saw in the previous theme, this can then also impact the student experience. The physical environment can affect the emotional environment. We know that nature and engaging with the natural world can benefit well-being, and that the promotion and provision of green spaces can impact the well-being of students and staff, either through conscious use, like going on a walk through a nature trail, or unconsciously through things like having good natural light within buildings. The physical environment also impacts our feelings of psychological belonging, such as the impact of inaccessible buildings or social spaces for disabled students and staff, making them feel like they don't belong. The physical environment also impacts our safety. Research has shown that building design can reduce risk from suicide by reducing needs, such as reducing access to high spaces or specialised storage for chemicals. The way that students and staff navigate the university, such as well-lit pathways and clear wayfinding, can also affect safety and reduce feelings of anxiety. However, the provision of space does not automatically equal that space having the impact that we might want. Providing a designated social space does not automatically mean that it will be used to build positive social connections. Research has shown that spaces must be appealing. They need to meet people's needs and have furniture or points of attraction, such as nature, art, a kettle, a board game, or any other things that can then facilitate the socialisation and community building within the space. So the take-home messages about the lived domain. We can see how all four themes, and if you refer back to the full University Mental Health Charter framework, their aligning principles of good practice, are closely intertwined to form the domain of live. There are many areas within this domain for universities to consider and develop that often do not have to be resource intensive. It can be thinking creatively about how you use space or place that already exists, and looking at how students and staff within your community come together to form connections. And this is why it's so important for a whole university approach to really understand the community. Understanding the community at a university, faculty, or individual student group level can really enable engagement with the domain and consideration of the themes and the principles of good practice that go along with it. Thank you very much for listening to this resource.